So in our daily living, what we're looking to have is true happiness. We want peace, we want tranquility, we want love. Because this gives us great well-being about ourselves and others, and in the world. We work for money, so we can have food, a home, clothing. We all look to be loved and to feel important. But yet, we may or may not feel fully fulfilled within our lives. We may have or may not have health, money, love. And why is that? It's probably because within our own psychology, we are out of balance. Therefore, our physical life becomes out of balance. Ultimately, what everyone searches for is peace within. But unfortunately, we look for it in all the wrong places. Swami Vivekananda says, "The end and aim of all science is to find the unity, the one out of which the manifold is being manufactured, the one existing as many." Raha Yoga proposes to start with the internal world, to study internal nature, and through that control the whole, both internal and external. It is a very old attempt. So as he's saying here, that as we dip into our own suffering and find happiness from within, by transforming those impressions, we begin to have more wisdom and more knowledge within, and therefore we know more of the external. Because the external world is but the gross form of the internal, or subtle, as many masters have said, as well as Swami Vivekananda says in his book of Raha Yoga. So it's come to a time when really we should look within. And this isn't done with beliefs, this isn't done with theories. Because all the masters, when they wrote their books, or they started the religions, or started the practices, they never used the word believe, or very little, because they truly wanted you to experience what gave them their happiness, or their harmony within them. And even in the Bible, where in Christianity, believe is used a lot. But if we look at the origin of the language, the New Testament at least, was written in Aramaic or Greek. We see this famous statement that says, "And Jesus said to him, 'If you can, all things are possible to him who believes.'" And that was in Mark 9:23. Now for this was written in Greek. And the Greeks had a much better relationship with the Spirit than we do now. And you could hold their whole cultures were built off of it. You can even see it in their mythologies. So the word they used instead of belief had a much deeper meaning. Nowadays, with the English language, it's not anything really to do with the spirit. It's much more had to do with business. A lot of the older languages had double meanings, related to physical as well as non-physical. If we see the word that translates into believes, it is the word pistis. Believes is a verb of believe. So the verb form of pistis, pistavanti. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. I'm not a Greek scholar or linguist. But pistis means literally faith, trust, derived from pitho, meaning to prevail, to grow in confidence, or persuasion. So something of faith and trust is a step above belief, because necessarily to believe something, you don't necessarily need fact. To trust or have faith in something is because you're basing it off past actions. You trust that your employer is going to give you a paycheck, or may not give you a paycheck every month, because that's what they have done in the past. So you have faith that's going to happen. Pitho, meaning to prevail, is actually the goddess Pitho is always associated with Aphrodite. Aphrodite is the symbol of love. And Pitho is that force that always persuades for greater wisdom. So you see there's two forms of pistis. The inferior form, or the unconscious form of it, is opinions and beliefs. The conscious form signifies power and fire. So you see in the book, the teachings of Jesus, the pistis sophia. Pistis, which means is that signifies power, fire. Sophia, it means wisdom. So that wisdom that fire or that power brings. It says pistis within can give us true happiness. So how do we start? We have to, in order to start, there's always a few basic rules and foundations that we have to have in our life. In the introduction of Gnosis, there were three needs of life that Samael Aun Weor gives. And that's health, money, and love. Because if we don't have health, we can't achieve any money, and therefore love will be much more difficult. Money, whether we're not, and this is not a superficial thing, it's saying that we want to become rich, but that we want to have what money provides. And that's shelter, food, and clothing. And to balance those two out, we need love. Because without the love, we become very selfish from within. And these are the basics and foundation that we need in our life to succeed in Gnosis. Because many times people get involved in meditation or the religion, and they forget about these three. They want to forget about their sufferings in the physical world, so therefore they try to leave it behind. And therefore they don't strive to make any money. They may forget about their health, or they may leave loved ones. But really, by doing this, you're actually just leaving the path. You're becoming a non-decent person. Even though you may have that yearning to find something internally, to walk towards God, you're actually, in some ways, walking away. It says here, a subject who does not fulfill the duties of the home cannot achieve. A subject who does not fulfill the duties of his home cannot achieve the great change. A person who is a bad father, a bad wife, a bad husband, or a person who abandons his home, for which man or woman will never be able to arrive at a radical transformation. The cornerstone of a revolutionary psychology requires that one has a perfect equilibrium. At home, by being a good spouse, a good parent, good sibling, and a good child. One must have perfect completion of his duties that exist with his suffering humanity. One must convert himself into a decent person. Whoever does not fulfill these requirements will never be able to advance in these revolutionary studies. That's Samael Aun Weor, an Introduction to Gnosis. So in order to have these needs of life, because many of us have some of these, but they're imbalanced. Maybe we have too much money and forgot about love, or forgot about our health, which happens a lot. So they're imbalanced within our own psychology, and therefore externally becomes imbalanced. So how do we work with this? And as well, in order to do so, we have to understand certain laws certain laws within. The first thing we have to work with is the power of thought. And it's, we have to remove the idea that the power of thought is just within this organ, within our skull, the brain. And that really this power of thought is stronger than any type of electricity or any type of weapon or any type of computer. And when that mental force is used, it can be directed. As he says, Samuel and Vior says here, the mental sphere of each person extends throughout the entire cosmos and reaches the most faraway stars. This is the cause of seeing, hearing, and feeling all that is created. So mental force is taking all the force of the power of thought and focusing it into one point. Just as if you were an archer and you release the arrow and it hits the target. We're putting that force into one point. And to do that, we first need to learn to relax the body, to relax the nervous system. And by doing so, concentration becomes much simpler and a lot easier. The next step to success of a project, and this project can be anything. It could be Gnosis, it can be a business, it could be something in your life. But we need to produce favorable circumstances. Second, since we know how to use the power of thought, as well, we have to put it into action. Anytime we use thought and action united, something can materialize. And materialization is possible. This is how we produce favorable circumstances. And this is how we were working intelligently. We can't just stop there. To work with greater intelligence, we need to look within and to recognize our own errors. If we see others as an aspect or an error within, and we decide to criticize the person, then we fail to recognize that error within. And as well, we don't leave room in order for us to appreciate or to love them. For they are the ones that are revealing that error within. And by doing so, we are starting to solve problems intelligently. Now, Samuel Onvior gives a practice, an introduction to Gnosis. And he says the way we can use these three aspects so we can have success in a type of business he talks about is that the mind is similar to an antenna, that it can broadcast waves out, especially when it's directed. Thus, you will define powerful thought waves that will go through space and reach brains of persons related with the business. So if we were to imagine ourselves performing a type of project that we want to succeed in, we imagine what we were doing, the people we were talking to, how we get from point A to point B, that this would actually reach out to others that relate to what we want to achieve. And they would be attracted to it. We should not use this power of thought either out of the laws of karma. We should always use it for good and for the best of others. We should not use that power of thought for us to gather more for ourselves. In doing so, we ultimately fail. And ultimately, we see what we have nowadays in this world, where people have become greedier and greedier, and society is beginning to fall apart. In this way, we're beginning to solve problems with those three aspects. But what we have to do is we have to start to solve problems in a different way, in a way that is very intelligent, but in a completely different manner. We think of problems that we have in life as conflicts, where we have one opinion or another desire. That, oh, I want to go out to the store, but it's cold outside, so I don't want to go anywhere. So you end up doing nothing, or you suffer either way. You stay at home and you don't end up going to the store, or you go outside and you suffer in the cold. And you got these desires on either side, both conflicts. Yes and no. But we have to begin to look at problems and solutions in a whole nother way, because the actual solution is within the problem itself. And the only way to do that is to actually bring tranquility into peace within ourselves, so we can bring silence in. It says here, it says silence of the mind. This silence arises by not thinking of the problem. The silence arises when we comprehend that nothing is solved with conflict and contradictions. Now, this is very opposing to what we normally believe. We believe when we get a problem, we weigh out the pros and cons. And then whatever has more pro is what we go with. But here, we're saying that we should forget about the problem, not think about the problem. It has nothing to do with the contradictions and conflict. So this is thinking about the problem in a whole new way. But it says, from the mental silence is born intelligent action, the intuitive and wise action that will solve the problem, no matter how different it might be. The intelligent action is not the result of any reaction. Again, this is very interesting. Here, that we actually get intelligent action by being silent. I know this to be very true, because when giving these lectures and putting these lectures together, opposed to what I thought in the beginning, that actually being silent in the mind as I proceed brings much more information and much more intelligent information and directions that would not expect. I actually save time by staying silent within than if I were to sit down and really think about how to put a lecture together, especially when it relates to meditation and Gnosis. And this is very counterintuitive. You would think by breaking things down and putting together, you could put something together that would make sense. And you can. But being much more silent brings things come out with a lot better flow. But again, Samael and Vior continues. When we do not accept the fact, not reject it, then arrives science of the mind. Intuition flourishes in silence. From silence, the intelligent action that totally solves a problem bursts forth. Only in mental silence, in calm, is there freedom and wisdom. So if we have true conflicts in our lives, we should really try to enter into silence. And you see, most people that are very a nervous wreck have a lot of problems. Maybe one of the reasons is because they're not remaining silent enough to get the solutions. I put Benjamin Franklin here because in Introduction to Gnosis, but if you're from the States or may not be from the States, you probably know of him as one of the forefathers of America, where he decided he had parts of his personality, aspects of himself that were preventing him from succeeding. So he wrote down 12 aspects of himself that he wanted to change, to transform. And he would spend 2 months on each one. Within 2 years, he totally changed himself. And we know him as one of the forefathers of the United States. One of the quotes he says, "Love your enemies, for they tell you your faults." A wise statement. So we talked about the power of thought, and that the power of thought can reach others. But not only that, through silence, we can receive true intelligence, intuition, into solving our problems. But to increase that amount of energy we have, we need to begin to conserve our energy, but as well, we are similar to an antenna. Any antennas that can broadcast a far distance are usually very big and have a lot of energy at the bottom of it, some sort of battery or some sort of fuel where it can broadcast. We know if we were in a car when listening to the radio, if there is a lot of trees or if there's a storm or the distance is too long, we don't get a clean reception. We get static. And this is the same with us. If we have a lot of mind stuff going on, we have a lot of emotions, physical agitation, the messages we received will not come, or they'll be skewed. They'll be incorrect. Fantasy. But the cleaner and more still and more silent the mind is, as well as the emotion and the physicality, the greater the antenna will receive and as well broadcast. If we want to use and greater the more powerful the antenna is, the greater chance it can receive and as well broadcast. So how can we grow our antenna? If you look at the human body, it looks like an antenna. We have a big spine, then you have a brain. The top of the antenna is usually associated with the pineal gland, which has the shape of a fennel, a thistle, or a pine cone, which you see here of Dionysus, who's holding the thyrosis, this big staff, what looks like a pine cone on the top of it. That pine cone represents the pineal gland. The staff represents the spine. And at the bottom of any antenna, there's always fuel. There's always a battery. If we look at the bottom of our spine, what do we see in this diagram? We see that the sexual glands are at the bottom. It is that energy that we have within. When an antenna or any type of machine doesn't have enough fuel or energy, it doesn't operate. This is the same with ourselves. If the fuel or the juice is not there, we will not be able to receive or to broadcast as strongly. A quote here by Samuel Envior says, "Great businessmen and individuals who usually have great success in their business commonly have this gland well developed. The pineal gland is intimately related to the sexual organs. The strength of the pineal gland depends on sexual strength. The man or woman who foolishly wastes his or her sexual energy fails in business because their pineal gland becomes atrophied. A weakened pineal gland cannot forcibly radiate mental waves. The result is failure. Fulfill this sixth commandment. Save your sexual energies. By this means, you will fortify your pineal gland and inevitably succeed. In this manner, you'll be able to radiate your mental waves with strength, power, and glory. These mental waves, after having arrived at the receptive center, the solar plexus, of other people who come in contact with you, will give you the success that you seek. Be triumphant. Always smile full of sincerity. Live happily. Work with pleasure and happiness, and the world will be yours. Luck will smile on you from everywhere." This is why in religions, in any esoteric tradition, they put so much emphasis on chastity. Because if someone wanted pistis, and they wanted wisdom, they needed their antenna to work properly. It needed to be able to receive as well as broadcast. It's interesting that Dionysus, here is the god of wine, or you could say intoxication. But not intoxication because of drinking too much wine, of the alcohol, but a spiritual intoxication, of enlightenment, in which that wine has represented the sexual energy in which it is transformed. Wine is a transformation from grape juice to an alcohol form, in which it can intoxicate you when you use it, when you drink too much. Here, this is relating to the sexual force, and that force is transmuted, but not releasing the energy. Therefore, the energy is going through the brain and intoxicating by rejuvenating the body, as well birthing our spiritual life. And one of those three aspects on there was called money. Now again, money was not for us so we become rich and wealthy, but really to provide what money can provide. And that's food, shelter, and clothing. And unfortunately nowadays, we think of money really to become wealthy. And when it becomes to this energy of the antenna, it is totally disregarded. And one of the most popular books has sold one of the most copies out of the whole world, besides the Bible, is a book that's called Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. And it's sold books all over the world, millions. And he has a chapter in there called The Mystery of Sex Transmutation. Now, this is very peculiar. A guy writes a book about money, or at least not so much money, but really how to succeed in what you want to succeed in life. And he has a chapter specifically on sex transmutation. And it's not a short chapter. It's at least 20 pages. Now let's see what he has to say. It says, destroy the sex glands, whether a man or beast, and you have removed the major source of action. Sex alteration takes out of the male, whether man or beast, all the fight that was in him. Sex alteration of the female has the same effect. One of America's most successful and best known financiers, followed by the habit of closing his eyes for 2-3 minutes before making a decision. When asked why he did this, he replied, with my eyes closed, I am able to draw upon a source of superior intelligence. It means he's letting the mind become silent, trying to think of his problems in a new way. Sex energy is the creative energy of all geniuses. There never has been and never will a great leader, builder, or artist lacking in the driving force of sex. Far from becoming geniuses because of great sex desires, the majority of men lower themselves through misunderstanding and misuse of this great force to the status of the lower animals. So obviously what he's saying here is that energy shouldn't be wasted on pleasure. And it's just not a source of energy that we just use for reproducing. It is an energy that can be used intelligently. And when that energy is used intelligently, it attracts in whatever we are doing. In doing so, that energy again should not be released. You know what I'm saying? That energy should be released means not released through the orgasm. Instead, it is transmuted through a pranayama, or sexual alchemy. The eye, as Samuel Onvior says, the eye wants to become externally rich because internally it is poor and miserable. So we have to ask ourselves why we want money and why we depend on it. We may not, but money has a psychological aspect within ourselves that we do have to question. Because in order to keep balance between health, money, and love, we need to question to why we may be attached to certain things in our lives. When we understand deeply that money only has its purpose to provide us with food, clothing, and shelter, we then spontaneously place an intelligent limitation on it. The human being is too poor internally, and that is why he has a need for money and material things for his personal sensation and satisfaction. So all in all, if we want the power of thought, we want to achieve silence so we can attract these three things of health, money, and love, we need to learn how to relax the body. We need how to direct that thought. And we need to be able to recognize our errors in order to become a better person. And that starts with meditation. One of the first steps of meditation is mental relaxation, as well as physical relaxation. If the nervous system is too ramped up, it's going to be very hard for us to concentrate. So once the body is silent, so can the mind. And then with concentration, we're taking that mental force and we're directing it into one point. Normally this is done when we focus on an object, such as a candlelight. We just focus on that candlelight. Imagination and will is very close to concentration. Usually, imagination is used with the concentration. So if we imagine a candle flame, we're concentrating on that image as we see it. And through willpower of continuously, if we forget about that image, we bring it back in. This is a way of building the willpower within ourselves in order to build that mental silence. Eventually, when the mind becomes concentrated, it can focus on one thing. That mind becomes silent. At that point, we have entered into meditation. In meditation, we can start to examine ourselves internally. We have greater connection. Our antenna has a greater connection to God, to our inner God, to nature. Contemplation can be a greater degree, can be something similar to ecstasy or samadhi. If we have total silence in that state of meditation, we can reach a state of samadhi where all our aspects, our ego, our fantasy has left and we're able to see reality directly. But for most of us will reach that point of meditation where we can really reflect. We could always get to the state of contemplation or samadhi with enough practice. So Samuel Mbeur, an introduction of Gnosis, he gives a few practices, which we'll do. I'll explain them in a little bit, but one has to do with relaxing the body, and another has to do with concentrating on a single point as we lie down. But before we start those practices, before we talk about them, I'll answer any questions that you may have.
You can type your questions into the chat box. So we'll give everyone a minute to think about any questions that they might have. All right, we have a first question. Are the sounds that emerge from silence an example of the void? It is another way that light is it another way that light emerges from darkness? Is the void within every atom the same way that the fire of Christ is in every atom? It moves me to work with being within the void and the void being within me at the same time. But that doesn't mean my idea is correct. Also, well, that's the first part, and then there's a second part to that question.
Okay.
So you want to take that first part?
Yeah, I'll take the first part. Yeah, the silence is a part of the void. The void obviously has different degrees depending on your own psychological state. If you have a lot of ego, or just like, for instance, if there is, you can see the sky, you can see the stars, but if there's a lot of clouds in, you may only get a little bit you can see. But if there is no clouds in the sky, you can see everything. So depending on your psychological state, depending how much, I guess you could say, crap is within us, depends on how much you can see of that void. And the less clouds you have within, the more you can be attached to that continuously. The more more clouds we have within, the greater effort it takes us to feel that void. But with practice, we begin to recognize it. And yes, was it the Christ force? Is that what she said, or he said?
It says the fire of Christ.
Yeah, the fire of Christ relates to the sexual force, but as well relates to pistis, which we talked about. Relates to the silence as well. Those are all aspects of the Christ. The aspect that's not of the Christ is their own psychology, is their own ego. That is not of the Christ. But we use that fire in order to create more wisdom within, so we can break through our own errors and remove those clouds within our mind. All right. Was there a second part of that question?
Yeah. The second part says, also, you talk about seeing within and samadhi. Are states of samadhi reached through the concentration in other senses, or is it through the equilibrium of senses?
It's both. I mean, when you, not so much physical senses, but when you are concentrating on your mind on one point, at one point in the concentration, your mind becomes steady on just one thing. It becomes effortless. It's just as it's just as easy as watching TV. At that point, you're hitting a state of meditation. But to go beyond that, you really have to forget about the body. And you're at a point of complete reception, of perceiving. That's beyond that concentration, because still at that concentration point, you're receiving, but you're focused on something. At a state of samadhi, that is not so much the case. You're in a state of perception. It's just a different way of looking at something. And there's different degrees of it. Obviously, someone that is a master at it is going to see something completely, is going to have a different degree of it than someone that is just constantly having to work with it and to get little pieces of it here and there. All right, there was
any other questions? Nope, I think I'm just
one
waiting.
question was sent to me directly. It says, what are the best ways to cultivate spiritual discipline? The best ways is really to start the meditation practice. Try to get it in at least 15 minutes a day, at least, and try to up the time every day. If you are doing that to a degree, but maybe you're not consistent, try in the morning. Is it in here? Okay, I didn't have that here. But Samuel, it says for basic success for a project, that if we are looking to succeed in Gnosis, at the beginning of the day, imagine how you want your day to go. And you'll become much more aware of your day. One thing is, don't cultivate a habit to make the mind random. And nowadays, we think multitasking is the way to live. Looking at the phone and doing work at the same time. Listening to music and doing work at the same time. Or at least harmful music and doing work. If anything, we're going to listen to music when we work. We should listen to classical, something that's uplifting. or listen to the radio when we drive home. These are habits that we should get out of because it just trains the mind to think from one thing to another, and it prevents that silence. So when we go sit down and meditate, it just becomes that much harder. Are any images and symbols that you may see of any significance? Or are they just imagination that need to be transcended in order to experience samadhi? Yeah, if we meditate, you're going to see images. Not all the time, but many times. Some are significant, many are not. If you experience samadhi, you will without a doubt know it. And if you do, and you do know you're in samadhi and you receive an image, I would meditate on that. But really, you're the only one to determine that because you're the one that's experiencing.